Our interview this morning is with Chris Purtee, who was born in Mesa, Arizona in November of 1982. Chris has served in the United States Army from July of 2003 until present. He is currently on active duty. His highest rank attained is E5 Sergeant. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Chris in any way. Also in the room are Milton Gibson and Gary Burton, who are our videographers. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas on Saturday, January the 12th, 2013. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and also for Operation Remember, City of Burleson, Texas. And with that little introduction, Chris, you can tell us about your time in the Army, sir.
Thank you for the introduction. As you heard, my name is Sergeant Purtee. I joined the Army back in July 2003. The reasons for me joining the Army and choosing the Army was I was already married, had one kid, and job was a little bit rough, hard to keep a steady job. And I had two cousins in the military and two uncles in the military. And they talked me into considering the military. Went through and did a lot of research as far as what branch I was interested in. Asked everybody that I knew that was in the military or had been in the military which jobs were best in their mind or provided a more stable transition into the civilian world thereafter. And after discussion, I decided on Army aviation, going into either avionics or hydraulics. Whenever I first went down to MEPS, they had originally had me signed up for an aircraft electrician, and the AIT wait, or the basic training wait time for that would be 6 months, give or take. I told them that wasn't quite good enough. I needed something a little sooner. So they gave me it's now 94 Romeo. It's a intermediate level avionics technician, and I could leave in 2 weeks for basic right after signing in MEPS. So I went with that, flew out to basic training in early August of 2003, and that was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Stayed there, completed my training there, took a bus ride over to Fort Gordon, Georgia to do my now 94 Romeo, at the time I believe it was 32 Romeo course, which was 92 weeks. I got there at the end of October there in Fort Gordon. And after I completed my first 6 weeks, my family was able to move out with me. So whenever I took my Christmas leave, I went back to Arizona and took my family, and we all moved out to Georgia until my training was complete in June. Upon completion of that training, I joined my unit in Phoenix, Arizona, and started as a temporary federal technician, because I was in the National Guard. So temporary federal technician as a aircraft electrician. Did that post for a little while, and then someone approached me, Staff Sergeant Taylor, I believe is what his name was, approached me and said that I might want to consider what they called ALSI. At the time, I had no idea what it was. I told him sure. He sent me up to the office, and I started to learn the basics of ALSI, Aviation Life Support Equipment. Practiced in there pretty much for a couple months, and then they sent me to the ALSI school. Because of my previous experience in ALSI, I did rather well. Got medal for that, and then came back and we had what's called an arms inspection, which is for the National Guard. And it normally happens every 3 years. It's an inspection. An inspection team comes in from another state and reviews your program, make sure you're within regulations, make sure that everything's operating correctly. And whenever I got back home from ALSI school, we had an arms inspection a month later. And I got commendable on that, so I kind of got the commander's attention and was a contributing factor in getting me into a full-time ALSI slot in Phoenix, Arizona. I stayed there all the way up until 2010. But in 2006, my National Guard unit was transferred down to Marana, Arizona, which they housed the Apaches down there. We worked on Black Hawks and OH-58s up in Phoenix. So whenever my National Guard transferred down there, I had to drive down for drill down to Marana every month. And then ended up getting divorced through a series of unfortunate events in June of 2006. And thankfully, good Lord had his hand on it, and I was scheduled for a deployment in August of 2006. So deployment came at a good time. I deployed with the unit out of Marana, and we went to, it was a small unit, and at first we went to Fort Hood, Texas, did a little bit of green training there, and then we went over to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and joined up with the 82nd Airborne there, and then deployed over to FOB Salerno, Afghanistan. And whenever we first got there, me and my first line leader didn't quite agree whenever we were going through training, so the chain of command saw fit to put me in, it's called SPO, Support Operations, which is, I was an E4 at the time, and that Support Operations position was an E6 position. But they slid me over to there, and it actually turned out to be really neat because I was in charge of coordinating all the transportation of supplies coming in and out of the base, whether it be through fixed wing, rotor wing, or we call them jingle trucks. That's the Afghanistan's version of an 18-wheeler. So by doing that, I figured, well, I'm in Afghanistan, I'm working with the locals, so I took it upon myself to learn a little bit of their language so that I could kind of bridge the communications barrier. Because whenever, especially the jingle trucks, whenever they'd come through, some of them knew English, knew some basic commands, but some of them didn't know a lick of it. And so by me getting with translators on base and working with other local nationals, I was able to come up with basic phrases, and got to the point by the end of the deployment where if I asked them how their day was going, they would tell me. And I had to tell them that I didn't quite understand what they were saying. But so that was interesting. And then halfway through the deployment, I had to go back with my section. Higher up command came down and said that we needed to have that shop operational. And so went through and did that. The last half of the deployment was probably the hardest because I was there for a solid year, boots on ground. And just being away from family that long and being away from everybody that long, it took its toll. But I counted it. We got rocketed approximately 50 times during the course of that year. Fortunately, they were firing rockets that weren't all that accurate, and only a few select ones actually hit the base. Closest one that got to me was one that actually hit a bunker, penetrated it straight through, scared the crap out of me. I was about 75 to 100 yards away from it. Thankfully, it was the first rocket that came in, so no one was in the bunker. I had a few buddies that were close and got a little shell-shocked, but thankfully no one was lost there. And then another rocket came in and got stuck in the bars of a window and didn't detonate. So that one was another close lucky call. It could have been real bad. And so nothing else real bad. The locals were actually really neat. The big thing with them is, because I took it upon myself to try and learn their language, it was neat to see them open up, because whenever they would first come in, they would be standoffish, a little bit reserved. But whenever you started talking to them in their language, they would open up. And I actually had one situation where it was extremely helpful, because we had 2 trucks come in, and this was about halfway through the tour, so I was doing okay with their language, Pashto. And we were unloading equipment that I was unfamiliar with. And I asked one of the guys if that other piece of, I got most of it off and there was a small piece still in there. I asked if that was ours or his. He said that it was his. Well, the other truck driver started yelling at him. So I just kind of backed off and let them figure it out. And then the truck driver started yelling at him, came up to me and said, "No, that's your piece of equipment." And so I thanked him, grabbed it, went along with my day, didn't think nothing of it. Went back and reported to my higher-ups how the delivery went, and they were shocked that an Afghan would actually come up and say that it was ours whenever I didn't know. Apparently, they like to take certain things that if it's in question, they'll grab it. Well, that wasn't the case. And so I think that my knowledge of their language actually showed them that there was a mutual respect. They hadn't done nothing to me. I hadn't done nothing to them. So, and I was in their country. So it was only fair to learn their language. And, you know, I was on guard duty. Everybody had to pull guard duty at one point in time or another. And so you get up there in guard duty and you'd see kids running around right outside the gate. They'd actually come up and grab the concertina wire, cut off a piece of it and run off with it, grab stakes out of the perimeter and run away with them. So you just call up, report it into base, and then their police officers would come up, and it was flashback to the 1800s where you stole something, you got whooped pretty good, and them police officers took care of it. So, but working with them was actually really neat. A few of them were interesting, standoffish, reserved, and you keep your eye on them. But most of them, once you get to talking with them, they were actually really neat people. And my experience there, even though, you know, it was away from your family and everything else, it was actually, I enjoyed it. It was an adventure to me. There was some bad things that happened to other people that were there, and I feel for them. But on a personal level, it was an excellent growing experience. It was the first time I'd ever spent any amount of time out of country. And so definitely some major culture shock whenever you see two guys standing there with their arms around each other and one of them's got their fingernails painted. That'll get your attention. So just learning about different cultures and how they do things. I came back to the States in January of 2008. So I was gone from August 06 to January 2008. Got back, rejoined my unit in Marana, rejoined my technician job in Phoenix. And then next event back in 2010. November 2010. I saw a post on the ALSI website saying, "We're looking for an ALSI tech over here in Texas." I didn't think much of it, but then went back home and it kind of in the back of my mind, and I said, well, if it pops up again, I'll look into it. And it popped up again 2 days later. So I called him up just to ask him if he was good, needed to, had everything he needed, had some people lined up for the job. He said he did, but he told me to submit a resume anyway. And so I shot him a resume over, and before I knew it, I was flying out here for an interview in Grand Prairie, Texas. Went to the interview, was expecting 2 other people there. There wasn't. I was the only person there for the interview. And then they said they'd be in touch with me, so I flew back to Arizona, and about a week later they said they were interested. And long story short, I started in the Naval Base in Grand Prairie, Texas, working with the United States Army Flight Training Detachment with Singapore back in April of 2011 is whenever I started with them. After I'd been there for about 2 months, I started to notice that there was only about 20 guys in the unit, but everybody in the unit was a subject matter expert, not only in their field, but in multiple other fields. It was actually amazing to see so much knowledge and so much wisdom cooped up in one little tiny training detachment. It got me thinking, what am I doing here? So I actually pulled my section leader aside one day and I said, hey, just out of curiosity, I'm seeing you guys know everything about the airframe. You guys know about training routines. You know about maintenance and flight, operations, everything else. You know about all this stuff. I know ALSI and a little bit about avionics. How did you guys pick me? And they said, well, we called Arizona whenever you submitted your resume, and we asked around all the aviation units in the entire state, and they asked who the best ALSI tech was. And your name kept on getting brought up. So that was something I was unaware of at the time, but apparently I was doing something right. So I've been working with them ever since, and since coming there, I started there as the ALSI NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge. And since then, they have also assigned me MBG NCOIC, so I manage all the night vision goggles and devices. And I am also now the S3, or Operations Acting NCOIC. And they are training me and prepping me to one day take over operations as an E7 whenever I get up that high. So that's pretty much my career in a nutshell right there.
Good.
How long was that?
Yeah, we're
15 minutes?
15, 16. We're doing okay.
It's all National Guard. It was not a whole lot of frills.
You did a lot of research before you decided on a branch, etc.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much knew what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
When you went to basic,
Mm-hmm.
Fort Jackson, and this was in
That was 2003.
I'm sorry, 2003.
Yep.
Somebody looks at this interview 50 years from now. You went over there, I guess, E2?
I actually, on my paperwork, it said I was E2, but I was paid and pinned as an E1. That wouldn't get fixed until AIT.
The question I was going to, that first paycheck,
Mm-hmm.
I guess you got paid twice a month.
Yep, significantly lower.
How much was that first paycheck? One of the reasons you chose this branch was and the military was security.
Right.
So this first paycheck, this was a real whopper, I'll bet.
The first one was interesting. The first paycheck was interesting. I do not remember exactly what the first paycheck was, but if I am not mistaken, that year, I track all my income by year. That year, I think I ended up making $15,000 that year.
So that was
So
a half a year, really. July.
yeah, well, I mean, I had other jobs
Right.
before that and everything, but I was making $8 an hour before I joined. And whenever I got my first paycheck, it was, I won't say significantly less, but whenever you're already functioning at bare minimum, anything goes below that, you feel it real bad. And so I felt it real bad. So
Following that
it
same
was interesting.
thought, after you got out of boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
you were a real bona fide E2, E3?
I was E2.
E2.
Yes, sir.
What kind of a bump did you get in dollars?
It wasn't real significant increase on a monthly basis, but I got back pay since I was supposed to be an E2 all the way through basic training. I got back pay all the way through, so I got 6 weeks of back pay. So that gave a little boost, which allowed me to drive out to Arizona, pick up my family, and come back. And plus, with the BAH and the which basic allowance for housing, and I didn't get BAS because I ate on base. I was just allowed to live off of it. That BAH pretty much was the only thing that allowed us to be able to stay there. So without that, I wouldn't have been able to see my family that whole time.
I was going to go there. Fort Gordon is basically Augusta,
Yes.
Augusta, Georgia.
Yes, sir.
And you lived off?
I lived in
base?
Augusta. Yeah, I lived on base until December. And because that particular training school is so long, once you pass a certain window, they allow you to live off base. You still have with your family. You're right. You can't live off base by yourself. You have to have family, and then they let you move off base. It's all conditional, command discretion,
And you would have
everything
been
else.
E3 at the time.
I did not make my E3 until I got back to Arizona.
So you went through your advanced school
Yep.
as an E2.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm trying to figure when you started to make the big bucks, Chris.
Honestly, I was able to start making ends meet whenever I made E5.
Wow.
That's now, whenever I say making ends meet, that's whenever the amount coming in matches the amount going out.
So you had a number of pretty lean years there.
Oh, yeah, I would say, yeah.
Your wife work?
No,
No.
no, and I had three kids with my first wife, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and then got divorced, and then now I've got 3 kids. One of them's adopted, and 2 of them are actually ours. And so, yeah, and she doesn't work. She stays at home.
I think you do a pretty good job at stretching a dollar.
I've learned a few tricks.
Okay. You mentioned ALSI, and that's an acronym for.
Yep, Aviation Life Support Equipment. What that includes is flight helmets for rotor-winged aircraft. That's all I worked on was rotor-wing aircraft. So the Apaches, the Blackhawks, Chinooks, and OH-58s. Basically what ALSI is the flight helmets. So everybody except for the Apaches flies with a flight helmet called HGU-56. And
Your job, just so I understand this, your job is to take care of the helmets that the helicopter crew wears.
the helmets, the vests, the first aid kits, the survival radios.
And that is a full-time job.
Yep.
You are a specialized
a-
individual.
For that particular piece of equipment, I am told that I know what I'm doing. I can hold my own. And I actually went over, I forgot about this. I actually went over, before I came out here to Texas, I got a phone call from the guys who run Air Warrior. That's the people who develop and train and put out all the information on the flight vests and all the equipment that goes with it, all the attachments. I got a phone call from them saying that they got a call from Boeing in Mesa. They build the Apaches. They had a new model Apache coming out, and they needed an ALSI person over there to assist with the testing of the cockpit size, make sure that they could egress with all the equipment and everything else. And I was asked to go over there and assist with that. And so that was fun because I actually, I met the gal there, and she was the engineer, PhD, what, I don't know, knows a lot more than I do. Went in there, so she grabbed me and brought me into this Apache simulated cockpit. I said, okay, here's all the equipment that I have. I said, okay, what about the rest of it? No. She goes, I don't have any more. I said, okay, well, I'll run back to my base. I'll grab a few things. I'll sign them out to you so you can have complete sets. And then I'll show you how to fit it all up and suit it all up. She goes, okay. So I go to my base. Next day I come out, bring all the extra stuff. And there's a younger guy standing there. And she goes, okay, he's going to be our test dummy. I said, okay. I thought it was, just some guy in school or training or something. So I suited him up in biological warfare gear, extreme cold weather gear, and all of his flight gear with over water equipment on. Poor guy couldn't move barely. But they all fit together real beautifully, and you could still move and perform stuff. Well, after I got them all fitted up and suited up, she stood there for probably about half an hour. We're inside a building, climate controlled. We sat inside there for about a half hour, 45 minutes. She's asking me questions. Okay, how does this fit? How does this work? How does this work? About a half hour into it, I look up there, and that poor guy sweating like none other. So I brought that to her attention. She goes, okay, we'll get him out of it. So I undid all of his equipment and everything else. And the next day, I was told to go up to their little office to fill in some stuff on their computer. And I see him in there. And I was like, oh, what do you do now that we have a chance to chit-chat? And he goes, oh, I'm one of the engineers here. Excuse me? He goes, yeah, I'm one of the guys actually designing and working with this new model Apache. I said, so you're one of the guys who actually builds the thing and drafts it up and everything? He goes, oh yeah. I said, and you're the guy they picked to go down there and put on all that gear? He goes, actually, I was kind of curious. I wanted to do it. Okay. So that was fun. But it was neat to be able to go in and actually go out and be able to see the airframe before it was released. And they said they were working on putting a rifle mount inside of the Apache. I was like, well, that's great. That's great. I looked at it. I said, but that's not going to work. He said, what do you mean? I said, you stick a rifle in there, the magazine's going to stick out. It's going to catch on the guy's vest every single time he gets out. Oh, really? They called a guy up there, stuck a simulated weapon in there, didn't have a magazine in it. And then guy got up in there, and he got out, because I can get out just fine. I said, hang on now. Get out a little bit slower. All right, stop. Now, look at where the magazine should be. He looked down, he goes, oh, this ain't going to work. So they said, hang on a second. I'm going to go get a guy real quick. So this other guy comes walking up. He says, what's going on? I said, well, here's this, this is what I would suggest, and maybe something like this, but, I don't know how to build aircraft. I'm just a troop here. And he goes, oh, okay, cool, thanks. And so he took it and works. He goes, well, this might not work, but this might work. And he started going on and drawing pictures and figuring out stuff. So he left, and the gal who was working with me came up. She goes, oh, that was really helpful to him. I said, to him? She goes, yeah, he's the one who designed that. Oh, that would have been nice to know. I might have approached it a little bit more tactfully instead of just saying your design's messed up. So, but I ended up getting a little t-shirt and a thank you from Boeing and a little letter saying we appreciate your help and everything from that. So
It's a long way out, but what I hear is 10 years from now, I assume you're going to do at least 20.
yeah, that's the goal.
10 years from now, your prospects, when you get back to the civilian world, your prospects for a good job appear to be pretty good.
Yeah. The only thing with ALSI is that, yeah, if you know what you're doing, you can find a job somewhere, not a problem. But there's just not that many of them. So yeah, you could find it, but I want to stay here, like Burleson, not just Texas. I want to stay Burleson, Texas. I like it here. We're actually able to buy a house, first house I've ever owned in my life. And so, and then, neat people, neat places, everything else. And so, if I could find something in this area, it would work out, and that'd be awesome. But if I didn't, then I'm one of those guys where you show me, I can figure it out. So I did ALSI. Everything I've discussed so far is everything I went to school for. Like I said, I did support operations in Afghanistan. I was the motor pool NCOIC in Marana. So I ran the motor pool. I was the master driver. I did all the driving training. Never went to school for any of it. Just noticed that there wasn't one in the unit, said I wanted it, grabbed the book, started reading, did it. And then hazmat certified. I can certify loads on hazmat, certify packing, drive it. Anything that needs to be done with hazmat, I'm certified to do. And then the S3, which is flight operations. Like I said, acting NCOIC. I've never been to that school yet. They're still working on sending me to that school. And so I've noticed throughout my career that one bad habit actually really works for the Army, and that is just doing what you're told. I don't question a whole lot. They say do this. If it's morally and ethically right, then I'll go do it. And with having that mentality, you pick up on stuff really quick. You have to. So if I had to go to another career choice, I'd figure it out.
Let me move on to your going to Afghanistan. How much time did they give you before you did some training at Hood?
Yes.
How much time did you have? How much call-up time did you have?
As far as we got our warning order back in, I want to think, March or April. But the warning order, that's one of those deals where, hey, we might be deploying. which you're already under that assumption anyway. So that doesn't really help out a whole lot. We didn't get the for sure, yes, we're going, until into July, or I'm sorry, June. About June time frame is whenever it was, okay, we're
And then
pretty sure.
You were on the plane, how much after that?
We were on the plane in August. I was on.
You had a couple months?
Oh yeah, yeah.
6
You
weeks,
you had
8
a, you,
weeks?
yeah you had a couple. Actually, you had almost 3 months actually. Now the warning order before that, you would start preparing, but you had about 3 months of we're gonna
But that
go.
warning order before, that's sort of like, hey, we're gonna have a tornado in April here in Texas.
Yeah,
It's
but
pretty good
whenever but whenever it's different whenever it comes down like that. You're always prepared for it, but whenever it actually comes down like that, there's extra training that all of a sudden pops up in the schedule. There's extra inventories that get thrown in just to make sure that, okay, everything is good.
You're
And
ready to go.
Right. And so and then the final 3 months, that's okay, we've already verified everything is ready to go. Now let's get it ready to go. I was on advanced party to Fort Hood, so I was the first one that left. And that was 31st August, 2006. So
When you got in country, let me ask you first, jingle truck. Do they have bells on them?
they sure do.
And that's where
They've got bells. Okay, the way I compared it whenever I was over there is over here in the States, you got your 18-wheelers, and you can always tell the guys that own theirs. Because paint job, it depends on the taste. Sometimes there's a paint job, sometimes there's not, but there's lights. They've got lights underneath, they got lights on the sides. My grandpa and my uncle both drove trucks and fascinated with lights. I don't know what it is, but lights. They wanted it to be lit up.
Lights and chrome.
Right, lights and chrome. That's what it is in the U.S. Over there, their definition of paint job is it's, you might have to edit this out, but it's real nice graffiti. They put pictures, everything else all over the truck. They hang tassels.
Done by the driver?
Yeah. They hang tassels, like actual fabric, from the bumper of the truck and around the sides. And there's jingle bells on there. They go down the road, they make noise. And it's a wonder how they keep them running, because not a single one of them would be legal in the U.S. as far as roadworthiness. Yeah, they took redneck to a whole new level. But had something to tell the buddies back home. You guys ain't got nothing.
The trucks of European manufacture?
Yeah, most of them.
Japan? India?
You know what? They're I couldn't really tell a model on them. There weren't like the 18-wheelers here, where you look and it's got Mack written on the front, and everything else. I mean, they are like the old warehouse trucks that you see driving around. They got the flat fronts, and some of them have a bed, some don't. That was pretty much their version of an 18-wheeler. As far as big truck, there wasn't any. There wasn't any. Most of the roads was dirt. I know of one paved road in our vicinity, and it wasn't on our base. It was just off the road a ways.
You took the initiative to learn some of their language.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You did that on your own. Nobody.
I learned the Pashto on my own. Now, whenever we were prepping to deploy, we had a little language class for everybody, but it was Dari, which is the northern parts of Afghanistan. Is Dari, Pashto, and one other one. I didn't work with it a lot, but there's 3 languages in Afghanistan, 3 dialects, if you will. And so they taught us a lot of Dari, and I had the little pamphlets and everything else. But in Fob Salerno, where we were, the primary dialect was Pashto.
You were in the southern part?
Salerno I was in the eastern part of
Eastern?
Afghanistan.
Okay.
So I could throw a rock.
Eastern, and that would be toward Pakistan? Okay.
Yes, sir.
How did you go about learning this dialect? I mean, you didn't have Berlitz or you didn't have a DVD that you could plug it
No.
in and
I pretty much did it the old-fashioned way. I walked around and said, "Hey, how can I learn it?" And they said, "Well, we have a translator over here." And whenever you live on a fob that's smaller than Burleson,
What does,
you can't leave.
what's the FOB? That's an acronym?
Yeah, forward operating base.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it was blackout, no white lights at night, no nothing. Yeah, it was a small base. Not, so I compare it to like a small town USA type thing, where you've got your bigger bases that everyone's heard of. You've got, I can't remember them, go figure, right? You got Kandahar and then Bagram. Those are like the two main bases. Those are like the city bases of Afghanistan. Well, then you have the FOBs that are kind of like your mid-sized towns. And then you've got your smaller outposts that are more like your little villages, so to speak. That'd be the best way to compare it to city sizes in the U.S. So Salerno kind of be like a medium-sized town, but you could walk all the way around it. So I think it was, I can't remember how big it was, but it wasn't that big. But you get to know almost everybody on the base. So you just ask around, hey, is there a translator, or how do I do this? Oh yeah, translator. We got like 6 of them on base or something like that.
The translator was employed by the Army, U.S. government?
Now, as far as employed, I don't know. I don't know the arrangement there, but he was a local national and spoke English really well, the one that I worked with. And I'd go up to him and ask him, hey, what's this word mean? Or how do I say this? I need to say, follow me. How do I say it? Oh, puma pasesa. I think that's what it was. And then, because I'd have to constantly tell him, hey, follow me. I'd bring him to a certain spot. I still remember one phrase, magfuk lift entazarwaki, which is, we're waiting on a forklift. It'll be a minute. And then laktem bawanasi is wait here. So I'd say the whole thing together, and it was, we're waiting on a forklift. It's going to be a minute. Wait right here.
And you said it in such a way that they normally understood?
Mm-hmm. Because I didn't go through and have them write it down or, do it like that. I would have him tell me 4 or 5 times the same phrase, and I would spell it out the way that I would sound it out. And so whenever I looked and read it, I could read it exactly how the guy said it to me. And the first time it was interesting. It took me a little while before I could actually say it with confidence. But, I would say it to them with kind of a question mark at the end of it. And they would say, oh, okay, and hand signals. Okay, wait right here. Like, yeah, you got it. So, halfway through the deployment, then it starts to get a little bit more confident. And you start to branch out to, talking to kids. Are you having fun? Kuma luba kave. Are you having fun? So you'd yell at the kids from the guard post or whatever, hey, kuma luma kave. And then they'd shout something back that I had no idea what it was. So.
You were there for a long time without the family,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you were there. What sort of contact did you have with the family here in the States?
Internet.
Did you have a visual? Did you have an electronic visual thing? Or was it all just audio?
Now, the visual thing, the ability was there. People could buy webcams, and we had internet. Now, reliability was another story, but it was there. And so, we'd hook up to the internet and email back and forth. My cell phone from back in the States actually worked over there. Now, it costed...
Could you afford it?
No.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I could receive text messages from home free of charge. Now, if I wanted to send a text message, it was like $1.50 for every text that I wanted to send out. And then it was something, I want to say it was like a $1 a minute or something like that. It was way up there to actually talk on the cell phone. There was a few times I did it, something would pop up, providing they didn't shut down the whole base. I could call out on my cell phone, and I did have 2 weeks R&R in August. So I was able to come out, but at the time I didn't quite understand what people meant whenever they said it doesn't really do you much good. And they're right. You come back home, you get to enjoy doing stuff that you wouldn't be able to do over there, but your mindset's still the same. You're still scared of lights. I remember flying back for R&R, and we're approaching the big base Bagram, and I see white lights coming through the window. And it scared me to death because I was like, there's not supposed to be white lights. White lights, they can see me, they can see me, they can shoot me. You better shut them off. And then back in the States, if I ever walked down the sidewalk, which I didn't do that often, but if I ever did, I used to have to walk around the lights and stay in the shadows. I couldn't do it. And then it was the first week that I was home. Whenever a rocket would hit, it was a siren that went off. And you'd get up, grab your armor, grab your weapon, go to the bunker. Well, I'm laying there in bed asleep, and a fire truck drove by. Full code red, whatever it is, lights, sirens, the whole works. I flew up, looked around, couldn't find my body armor. Sat there confused for a second, trying to figure out why my body armor wasn't next to my bed where I always left it. And then looked around, realized that, okay, I'm not there. There's no way I was falling back asleep just yet. So I grabbed my shotgun, went out to the living room, and flipped on a John Wayne movie with my shotgun next to me. Sat there, watched it for a little while. Then went back to bed. That was
Good that you can laugh about it, I guess.
yeah.
It's,
Yeah, well, actually, I almost got shot the night I came home. I forgot about that too. I almost got shot the first night that I was home because I came home and landed at the airport. You know, family, everyone's welcoming you. Big deal. And then we went out to my grandparents' house. There was a little party shindig type deal. And didn't drink because I learned my lesson a little bit earlier. So went back to my condo that I was staying at, and I was letting my ex-wife stay there. Well, I walked in the door, dropped the bags, and she goes, okay, good, you're home. I'm leaving. I'll leave you with the 3 kids. And she went to walk out the door. And first thing that went through my mind was they told me that I'm not supposed to be alone with the kids until they get used to me again because they haven't seen me for a year. They don't know how I'm going to respond. I don't know how they're going to respond. I don't know their routine. I don't know what they're allowed to do and not do. No. And so I went up to her and I said, no, you're not. You're not leaving. Not yet. She goes, all right. But that whole thing got me worked up like none other. I was mad. So I walked outside and was pacing. And then my ex-wife called my cousin who had just came back from a deployment about a year before that. So he got on the phone with me. He goes, yeah, you pissed off? And I said, yes, sir. He goes, okay, I need you to drop and give me 20 push-ups. I said, not a problem. Boom, stood back up, now what? He goes, give me 20 more. I said, all right. Stood back up, now what? You give me 20 more. I said, okay, stood back up, now what? He goes, okay, you feeling a little bit? And I said, a little bit, I just need to walk around and cool off. And he goes, okay, you got your head wrapped around it now. You're good to go. Just walk around, cool off, you'll be all right. So I'll come over there tomorrow, we'll go out and hang out for a little while and just get you used to it. Because, I mean, everything changes. You leave, you come back, everything's changed. And just trying to wrap your head around it. Whenever you're over there, you got to worry about like 3 things. Going to work, eating, not getting shot, and keeping track of your weapon. That's pretty much your entire mentality when you're over there. So you have that mindset for about a year. Then you come home and now you've got kids and extended family and ex-wives and bills and traveling and gas and crazy people and everything else. So just trying to get your head wrapped around it all is overwhelming. And so it takes a minute. So I'm sitting there pacing out there trying to calm down. I'm not a big fan of rap music. Apparently my neighbor is. My old neighbor was a fan of rap music. So he came driving up and all I hear is boom, 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 boom from his bass, which I've heard that before, but it's different now. So I turned around and I stared him down. And so he came over and he stopped his car, and me being a little bit worked up, I walked up to it. He said, what? I said, thank you. Thank you for what? I said, for turning down your effing music. And he goes, I turned around and walked away. Because he had to turn it down to talk to me. Well, I ended up meeting up with him like 2 days later and talking with him a little bit, apologizing for how I acted and everything. And he said, well, honestly, it surprised me. I said, it did. He goes, yeah, that you walked away right then. I said, was that a good thing? He goes, yeah, I had a pistol in the passenger seat. I was fixing to shoot you. I was like, well, I appreciate you not doing that.
in country.
Mm-hmm.
You lived at this FOB.
Uh-huh.
You were in a barracks.
I was actually in what they called a B hut. You had 3 stages of buildings over there. You had your tents, then you had B huts, and then you had brick and mortars. So tent, self-explanatory. Big old canvas tent. The B huts was nothing more than 2x4s and particle board with a roof on it. So one step up from a tent, but interesting. And then the brick and mortars, they were building those. And those were actually built like bunkers, and you
Have
could stay in them.
showers.
The brick and mortars, the showers were separate. Showers were separate from everything else. And where we were, with our little B huts, we had like a trailer set up that had showers in it and porta-johns. So porcelain is really nice after
Army
a year.
had to purify the water or treat the water, or
I imagine that they did. I wasn't involved in that too much. I know that for food and water, everything was flown in, and I know that because I was doing the support operations. And then gas was trucked in, and then all the trash and everything was burned. We had a massive burn pit to the north of the base, and then an incinerator right next to it. For anything that couldn't be burned, it was incinerated. So, and then generators, a whole bunch of generators lined up.
never having been there, was it hot? Was it cold?
I would have to say, it was actually kind of funny because whenever we landed, I don't know if you're familiar with Arizona terrain at all, but whenever we landed, I looked up at the mountain ranges and told my buddies, I said, you know what's funny? I said, what's that? I said, we could walk over that mountain right there, and there's a lake out in Arizona right there, because it looked exactly like Arizona. Not the saguaro cactuses and stuff, but kind of more of the upper, not quite to the forest part of Arizona, but kind of like that high desert part of Arizona. That's pretty much what it looked like. Rocks everywhere with, you know, scattered trees and brush and mountains like none other.
Dust storms?
We had one. We had one dust storm, but it wasn't real bad. It was more of, we'd have a lot of rain. Of course, we were in a little valley. So, but there really wasn't a lot of dust because of all the rocks.
What did the natives do for a living?
I did see like a auto mechanic shop looking thing out in the village. We had a couple guys on our base that made bread. We called it foot bread, but it was actually really good. They had a salt and garlic one, and a cinnamon and sugar one. And you get this piece of bread about yay big around, about that thick, that was just coated with cinnamon and sugar. Some guys were like, I'm not touching nothing made from there, blah, blah, blah. So I went over there and tried it. It was like, for $1, he got like 3 of them. So it's like, hey, shoot, I'll take that. So that worked out really good. We did have one, I just now remembered, we did have one Apache that was flying, and there was a problem with the rear rotor, the tail rotor, broke off and actually took off half of the stabilator with it. Stabilator is the part on the back, goes up and down, kind of controls the speed. Well, it sheared off half of that. So now it had no tail rotor and part of the stabilator sheared. And they actually increased the airspeed, used the airspeed to keep the aircraft from spinning out of control, and landed it on the landing strip like a fixed wing aircraft. We were out on the range. You still do your qual and everything else shooting into a mountain. We see this Apache coming in, and you can't tell from that distance if there's anything wrong. All you see is an Apache coming in acting like a C-130. So my buddy's like, well, did you see that? And then we went into base and went around and asked about it. Why'd they land like that? They never land like that. It was, oh, well, he didn't have a tail rotor. That would do it. They got medals for landing that, because that's actually really tricky to land it like that.
Let's see here. I guess one quickie here.
Mm-hmm.
You live here in Burleson.
Yes, sir.
And you commute to Grand Prairie on a daily basis?
Yep. But given the fact that for a little while I actually lived 2 hours away from where I worked, it's not that bad.
Going back to, I guess, going back to Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
You ate from an army kitchen?
Yeah, it was set up in a tent initially whenever I first got there. And you would go through and it was just like a regular chow line.
But everything that you got came in on an airplane
Mm-hmm.
that you yourself offloaded or
I wouldn't
prepared
offload it, I would somehow coordinate it.
Yeah.
Like I would go there and I was in charge of 3 units. And obviously there's 7, 8, 9, 10 units on one base. And so I managed, basically a third of it, but I had to keep track of all of them that were coming in to make sure none of them were mine. And so they'd fly in, okay, that one goes over defact, okay, that one goes over there, that one goes over there. Let's wait for them to handle it.
The rocket attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Who made those rockets? Were they Russian or Chinese, or were they homemade?
I know what they are, I'm just not sure if I can say.
Well, we heard last week about the first B-52 that was ever shot down, and it was shot down by a New Mexico Air National Guard fighter plane. So we're not sure what you might tell us, but
Well, that was Vietnam. Was Vietnam?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's about that time.
So it's been
before Nam.
So it's been a few years ago.
Yeah.
This one's still going on.
Okay, I'll withdraw the question. Anyway, Chris, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us, sir.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Heard a lot of things we had not heard before. We appreciate your time, taking the time in the service, taking care of us, and appreciate you coming to see us.
Yep,
Thank
not
you.
a problem. Thank you.